It Was Almost Real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast, Episode 34. Hello and welcome to this episode of It Was Almost Real, the Pro Wrestling History Podcast. My name is Ken Zimmerman Jr., and this is the podcast dedicated to the history of professional wrestling between 1870 and 1920, although sometimes we'll stretch into the 1930s. And in this episode, we discuss the wrestling schedule of Ed Strangler Lewis during 1913. But first, I'm joined in the studio once again by my cousin Dangerous Dan, and have we got a bunch of wrestling news and updates to go over.
Boy, do we ever.
So, just to jump in, we're going to have, this episode will come out on October 13th, and then we will have an episode on October, this comes out on October 13th, and then we'll have an episode on October, no, I'm wrong, Dan. This episode will come out on October 9th.
Oh, okay.
And then we'll have one come out on the 23rd, 22nd, and the 29th.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Yeah. So we'll have 3 episodes on Monday this month, and then we'll have 2 more episodes in November, 2 more episodes in December, and then if I can con Dan into it next year, we will record most Mondays with the exception of the third Monday, which will be a written blog post on the website.
I'm not working the day after Super Bowl Sunday either. Just to let you know.
Well, we don't have to worry about that. We'll get it in sometime before then. And the prodigal son will return. He's dealing with some family stuff lately, but everything's coming out well. A member of his in-laws is doing much better, so that's all coming out well, and we'll have him back on the show. I'd like to get him on for the second December show is actually going to come out on Christmas Day.
Oh, okay.
We'll record it long before that,
yeah.
But it's actually going to come out on Christmas Day. And he's never heard the Happy Happy Christmas song, so I thought we'd have to make sure that he heard that.
Oh, yes, the Happy Happy Christmas song is going to be, yeah.
And speaking of that, do you remember that award-winning country and western song that we wrote when we were teenagers, but never?
But we can't repeat.
Well, we can't say
lyrics.
one of the words, yeah.
But it involved $12 whiskeys and a...
No, it was the other way. It's
that's right.
$3 whiskey. The word we can't say is a very vulgar reference to a lady of the evening. But basically the lyrics were $3 whiskey, $12 this reference. That's $15 I ain't got no more.
Mm-hmm.
And if you throw in about your wife leaving you and your old dog blue, that is $1 million selling
and
country
pickup
western
truck
song. Yeah, you got to get the pickup truck in there. I forgot about that. But yeah, you get all that in there. That's $1 million.
Oh, absolutely. And I can't believe nobody's recorded that song yet.
Yeah, well, I can't believe that the country music fans in the family would get a little irritated when we start singing that song.
Well, because they say we were being sacrilegious or not holding true to the... Well, you know what I said to that?
Yeah.
When you had to ride with my father unit anywhere and an 8-track, yes, we had an 8-track in the family mobile back then, folks. Willie Nelson, Ernest Tubb, or any other country music act was in there.
I thought I had it bad.
Yeah.
Dad just made me listen to WIL every time we went anywhere.
Oh, okay.
So our fathers were country music aficionados, and we were stuck listening to that all the time. So growing up, so we don't have a warm feeling in our. I don't mind some of the Garth Brooks stuff, and I have an appreciation for Waylon Jennings I didn't have when I was a kid. But I still, that was just this side of child abuse.
Yeah.
Dad never ever hit me. He just made me listen to country music. I'd rather you hit me.
All right, exactly. It's a lot less painful and it gets over quicker.
Yeah. So one of the things I also wanted to touch on. You know what? Let's do the get all the updates about the shows out.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And then let's go into the news itself. But
Okay.
part of what I want to talk about is this episode that I'm covering. And in this episode, I had to revise and extend my remarks like they do in Congress because I screwed up twice. Number one, I said this was going to be Ed Strangler Lewis's schedule in 1912, and I don't even think he was Ed Strangler Lewis yet in 1912. It's actually going to be 1913. And we're only going to do the first 6 months because I'm already at 20 matches. If I did the whole year, this would be a 5-hour podcast. So
and I'm not Jim Cornette.
Yeah, nobody's going to listen to that. So we're actually just going to focus on the first 6 months. But the reason I wanted to look at this anyway is because my next book project is actually going to be about the early career of Ed Strangler Lewis. Because one, there's not a ton out there about it, and number two, a lot of the things that people believe are true, like he changed his name so his parents wouldn't know he's a professional wrestler, were not correct.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I think the reason he became Ed Strangler Lewis was as simple as the fact that there was a Bob Fredericks who was one of the established Kentucky wrestlers already, and Robert Friedrich, which is Ed Strangler Lewis's real name, is too close to that.
Oh, okay.
So it was just simply that's why he changed it, and when he changed it, he took a name in homage of one of the original Wisconsin, really, because Ed Strangler Lewis, Robert Friedrich, is from Nakusa, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Evan Strangler Lewis, up to that point, was probably the most famous Wisconsin professional wrestler of all time.
Yeah. Now,
that's why he became Ed Strangler Lewis.
Right. Now, Ed Strangler Lewis, being from Wisconsin, no, he was still based out of Kentucky for
1913, all of 1913. Yeah.
Whereas Evan, he was from Wisconsin, but based out of Chicago for most of his career.
Yeah.
Okay.
Alrighty. So, WWE back in the news.
Did it ever leave?
I don't know. So they're already under new ownership.
Yep.
And the first order of business, of course, was to release more wrestlers and tick the fans off and make them hate the company even more. And they also announced that they're leaving Fox, the network broadcast, for USA Network, and they're going to have 4 NBC specials. I don't think the second one is that big a deal either way, but the releasing the wrestlers, that's the first thing you do when you take over the new company.
Right.
Why didn't they talk to Triple H and Vince about doing that before the ownership switch?
Exactly.
Because now the first action you take is the new owners is you cut wrestlers, which always ticks the fans off.
Oh yeah, absolutely, because there might be some guy that's very, very minimal to the company, but he's still going to have fans.
Yeah.
And that person will be like, well, I'm not going to be able to see,
And Dolph Ziggler had a lot of fans because people thought he got a raw deal all these years.
Oh, he did.
Having to be beat by everybody, but, the guy mopping up in the back, or, when you put everybody over and done it well.
Yeah.
Who did they get to put Braun Breaker over last year?
Dolph Ziggler.
Yes, because he can lead guys good, very good matches.
And I think that he got a raw deal on that. The guy's been there for 20 years. Make him a trainer.
Yes.
Put him in over NXT.
You telling me that they couldn't use him as a trainer with some of the stuff that they're putting in the ring now?
Yes, I know. That's why I said he's getting shafted.
Although Tony Khan now will have the opportunity to add him to AEW, and
oh Jesus,
he would be a great trainer for AEW too.
He would be a great trainer for AEW.
God knows they need it.
But Tony Khan is such an idiot, and yes.
Oh,
if you know Tony Khan, you tell him that Dan said he's an idiot.
But I wanted to say something nice about Tony Khan this time, because we really did kind of blast him last time.
Yeah.
Deservedly so,
yeah.
But we really kind of blasted him. I want to say something nice about him this time. Elon Musk has done a lot stupider stuff than he has over the past 6 years.
Changed the name of Twitter to X.
X, yes. but stick to making electric cars.
Yeah.
You buy this social media thing that's been around forever. You make a bunch of changes that ticks everybody off, and then you rebrand it to X. If I'm sitting here and I tell you, hey, I'm going to go get on X, you think I'm going to go on a porn site.
Right, exactly.
It's like, give me a break. So, Tony, you're not nearly as dumb as Elon Musk has been lately, so we wanted to say something nice about you before we start ripping apart your booking.
Which we're about to do. Because, you can bring Dolph Ziggler. You can bring any one of those released wrestlers over to AEW, and that's fine. But you're not going to replace a wrestler of CM Punk's caliber.
No.
Or drawing power.
No.
So
you might get a bump in the ratings for 1 week by bringing Dolph Ziggler up. You're not going to draw 1 million people to your pay-per-view.
Right, exactly.
You know, and that's one of the things we brought up X and Twitter. I had talked to you about this actually a week or two ago when I saw it. I don't know what the latest brouhaha was, but there was something that happened. I don't think it was a CM Punk firing. I think it was something else. But every time something happens, you can go on Twitter, and the AEW fans and the WWE fans are taking chunks out of each other because neither one of them likes either one of the other's companies. And I tell you right now, if we were not doing a wrestling podcast about historic wrestling, I probably wouldn't be watching any wrestling nowadays.
Yeah.
Because I look at WWE as horrible either community theater or public access television. It is very substandard acting and writing. You've got a bunch of frustrated Hollywood writers on the WWE creative team.
Yeah.
And they spend more time on the skits. The only thing worth watching anymore is the pay-per-views because all that junk is out of it. That's for the weekly TV show.
Yeah, exactly. And, well, you know.
And then AEW is extreme gymnastics. It's a bunch of moves that in and of themselves could look cool, but it leads to nothing.
Exactly.
It's like you get out there, do everything we know how to do, and then the match just ends. This made no sense whatsoever.
Right.
I do want to, in the next couple weeks, I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I've heard it's a very good match, and I like Buddy Matthews quite a bit. I would like to review that AEW match of Buddy Matthews and Andre Iliolo.
Oh, okay.
Just to see if that was something that I would think stands up.
Yeah.
Because AEW does have some wrestlers I like. I really wish it was a more viable company. But the problem with AEW is it's booked by a fan.
Yeah.
And it's booked like a fan would book it.
Right.
They want to put together the things that they were interested in seeing, but there's nothing that leads to why we would be seeing this in the first place.
Right. There's no run-ins. There's no cheap shots. There's no, okay, why is all of a sudden these guys feuding? You just brought them out?
There's just no continuity.
Right, exactly.
And it's frustrating because I really would like to see a viable company against WWE. The stuff that Vince has done. Here, Tony, I'll say something nice about you again. At least you're not out there sexually harassing the employees and doing things that should preclude Vince from being the executive chairman of this company anymore.
Exactly.
And Endeavor, that's their fault, and it's Vince's fault for not having the tact and class to step down when all of that garbage came out. You know, he gave his paramour a job. Those people have done that for years.
Oh, yeah.
But he also, some of those things that he paid out were also to settle sexual harassment suits if the information we heard about those was correct in the first place.
Yeah.
So he should not even be the executive chairman anymore.
He should be in jail.
Well, if he did some of the things that they've said, I mean, you can't use company funds to pay off for your malfeasance.
Right.
There are things, that's why he's under federal investigation right now.
Exactly.
You know, I'm loath to always say we should be putting people in jail because I hate now the way everybody wants to put people they don't politically agree with in jail anymore.
Well,
it's both sides. I'm not giving anybody a pass in this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the fact that we want to weaponize the criminal justice system when we don't agree with people. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, I'm always loath to. But as you point out, there could be criminal wrongdoing here. He could have been misappropriating company funds to pay this. And now that he's paying it back, well, yeah, you've got the money to pay it back. But a lot of people would not. It's still a crime, whether you pay it back or not.
Yeah, well,
if you
sexually assaulting.
I mean, if there was any of that, you definitely should be in jail.
Yeah,
no question. And if it's anybody I know, you get your I can't say that on the podcast.
Right.
Let's use a wrestling term. You'd get stretched.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and then there was another thing that kind of came out in the news, and I actually heard this on the Jim Cornette Experience, I think, or the drive-thru, but I actually agree with what Dana said, and I don't agree with Jim and Brian's take, but it's because they're not MMA fans.
Right.
But I agree with him 100% when he said the original fans for the MMA were wrestling fans, and they were.
Mm-hmm.
They were people like me who were interested to find out. I always wondered if wrestling was real, who would the wrestlers be that were on top.
Right.
And that was the fan base for a lot of the early MMA, and that was a crossover audience.
Mm-hmm.
Jim says that is not true anymore, and Dana White definitely says it's not true anymore. And Jim took exception with Dana saying that's not true anymore, but I do believe Dana's correct in this, because I would not be watching wrestling if we weren't doing a wrestling podcast based on history.
Well, what do I tell you every week when how do I watch wrestling? It's a 15-minute recap show on YouTube every week.
Right. I can go through the Peacock weekly shows.
Uh-huh.
I can go through 7 hours of programming in about 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Because if I watch one thing, that will be surprising that if I find one thing during. When the Bloodline stuff was coming on, it probably took me 25 minutes because I'd watch whatever they did.
Right, yeah.
And if there happened to be a match on Raw that caught my attention, and I will say, I really loved the Dominic Mysterio, Rhea Ripley stuff for a while.
You know what?
They have chemistry.
And actually, when Dominic first came out, he's not a physically imposing guy. He's taller than his dad, but
he should be the chicken crap heel. He is the prototypical.
And he is, like I said, he's the heel. And he looks like that he belongs down at Joe's garage changing the oil on your car instead of being a wrestler. But I'll tell you what, the more I watch Dominic, I'm actually starting to like the kid. What I'm seeing on the
he plays that role very, very well. And he and Rhea together have great chemistry.
Oh, they do. They do.
It reminds me of the old Ellery Queen movies. The star actress, the last 3 movies she did was with William Gargan, and they were a real-life couple.
Uh-huh.
But she had much better on-screen film chemistry with the first actor that had been in the first 2 or 3 movies with her.
Oh, okay.
And it kind of reminds me, Rhea obviously is engaged to Buddy Matthews.
Yeah.
But she has great on-screen chemistry with Dominic.
Yeah, she does. And, Dominic's out there taking bumps and getting his hind end handed to him.
Which he should be as a chicken crap heel. I mean,
exactly.
He plays that character great.
But you know what? I'm still not completely sold on him. But he's starting to grow on me.
Yeah. So, and that's what I'm saying, is most of the people that watch MMA now do not watch pro wrestling. Right. And I wouldn't do it because there's not much of a pretense anymore that these guys are particularly tough. Some of them are, but for the most part, I mean, Brock is.
Yeah.
Roman Reigns, just because of his size, you wouldn't want to be, trying to mess with him. But go to AEW.
Mm-hmm.
I am bigger than half the roster. My son Caleb.
Oh, yeah.
Is much bigger than, he's probably bigger than all about 10% of that roster.
Yeah.
It's just not physically believable that you look at these guys and think they could beat up anybody.
Right. And, I think that's...
So that's not the audience you're getting anymore. That audience watches MMA now.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Nowadays, in wrestling, you're lacking your classic tough guys. Harley Race, Andre, Haku, all these guys, Arn Anderson.
What do you think Harley would have done if some guy like Orange Cassidy said, "Hey, I'm going to jump out of the ring on you with my hands in my pockets, and you need to catch me"?
I think Harley would have said, "Well, kid, you're going to hit your head on the mat."
Yeah, because it was going to be one of two things. Harley would just walk away, or Harley would punch him in the face as he came through the ropes.
Yeah, exactly.
It would happen one time.
Uh-huh.
You just don't have that anymore. So I think, by and large, you and I have talked about it. We didn't watch wrestling for a long time.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And we had gone to different things. I think the traditional wrestling fans of the 80s and 90s, for the most part, are gone and don't watch this new style of wrestling.
Right. Well, it's like I've told you before, and we've discussed this, that I wish they'd go back to the days of the old territories.
I'm trying to fool somebody.
Yeah.
Yes, we all know it was work. To be honest, most of us knew that it was a work back then. We knew that some of the stuff we were seeing was not correct, and there was funny stuff going on and all of that.
Oh, yeah.
But you could suspend your disbelief to enjoy the show and that, but you can't do it when nobody's trying to.
Exactly.
That's one of the things that turned me off on AEW so quickly was the obvious cooperation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I hate that. I don't like it when I see it in WWE either when they're standing on top rope. But
yeah.
Now I brought back to my thought. The whole thing about the two groups of fans not being able to get along.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I think you and I are probably as close as cousins can be, you know. It's almost big brother, little brother sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You love auto racing.
Oh, yeah.
The Indianapolis 500, you look forward to it every year.
And the World 600.
Yeah.
The Daytona 500. Yeah, I would mark my calendars. You say, hey, you want to go do something on February 5th? No,
Yep. And I knew that. I knew you loved auto racing. You know I have no use for auto racing. I've never enjoyed it. I've never watched it. I'm going to probably get stuck doing it because my grandson, I think, is going to love it.
You know what? He's a good kid.
Yeah. But I never felt the need to come to you and go, oh, I can't believe you don't like this. Oh, I can't believe you like car racing. What's wrong with you? Blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And start yelling at you and telling you what's wrong with you. And I don't think you're a big MMA fan, are you?
I am not. I follow it very, very, very loosely. I know. I followed it more when people like Randy Couture, Chuck Liddell, Anderson Silva were big names back then. But as nowadays you could say, hey, Dan, name an MMA wrestler. I'm going to name maybe 2, maybe 3. And that's after going, oh, wait a minute. I got to, it's...
Right. We've never felt the need to chastise the other one about liking something that I didn't like.
Right, exactly.
And vice versa. And the other thing is, I mean, the fans act like you've just told them their baby's ugly.
Yeah.
If you don't like AEW and they're an AEW, or WWE and they're a WWE fan.
Yeah.
And I don't like either one of them that much. But they act like you just told them their baby is ugly.
Right. They can't believe that you
say something about my kids or my grandkids, or you say something about somebody I care about, yeah, I might get mad. I might say something to you. If you threaten them, I might stretch you.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm not going to get all upset. If you don't like, you've never watched a Mexican television show in your life.
The only Mexican television I've ever watched was Lucha Libre.
Yeah, so you never watched a Mexican television show.
Yeah.
I love El Dragon.
Yeah.
All right? If you watch an episode of El Dragon and said that was the boringest thing I've ever seen, I couldn't make heads or tails out of that, I'm not going to chastise you and get upset about it. Or if you say, you know, the guy that was playing that part of that guy you like, he's an idiot.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't know these people. I'm not going to get upset about it. It's each your own. If everybody liked the same thing, this would be a very boring world.
Right. It's like on
and
Vikings.
We'd have a shortage of some things and an overabundance of everything else.
Well, we both like the show Vikings, but we have different favorite characters.
Yes.
Yours is Ivar.
Yep.
You know, mine was Loki.
Yep.
Now, and are we going to sit here and go, oh, I can't believe you don't like Ivar?
Exactly.
I'm not saying I don't, but he's not my favorite. You
know? Or to have an argument about the people who play the characters. Right. I don't get why people get so. They talk about the person like they know them.
Yeah, like they're their best friends.
Right. Nelly's one of my favorite artists. I love his music. I've seen every episode of Nellyville probably 2 or 3 times. What I know about Nelly is from what I've seen in the TV show and heard him talk about. I don't know Nelly personally. We are not buds. I've seen this much of his life, and if you could see us, I'm holding up my fingers about 1.5 inches apart because you only get a glimpse into a very small section of that person's life.
And that's just like me with Jimmy Buffett. I've watched his concert DVDs. I've been to his concerts, but could I walk up and say, "Hey, Jimmy, how you doing today?" No, because I'd get tackled by security.
Right.
You know,
it's not like but people act like they have a relationship with them,
yeah.
and they will fight you quicker over that than if you insulted somebody in their family.
Exactly, and I don't get it.
I don't either. So, and I probably never will.
Right.
So, I guess what we're telling you guys is, don't worry, be happy.
That's right.
Relax, take a chill pill. And the last bit of news we've got to cover before we get into the main content is, and this one actually is a sad one. And I told you before the show, I don't think I ever saw this wrestler wrestle live or on a show in real time.
And neither did I.
And it's Brett Wayne Sawyer, who's the brother of Buzz Sawyer.
Buzz Sawyer is a head case. Brett Sawyer was a pretty decent
human being. And it's very sad. He was only 63 years old. So, again, another wrestler who dies too young. We have way too much of that. But we want to send out our condolences to his family. I have seen some of his matches since. I think the stuff he did in Portland and then the Georgia stuff where he came out as Buzz's brother. And I think both of those were pretty good runs. He was a pretty good underneath babyface.
Yeah, he was.
So we wanted to send out our condolences there.
Yes.
So after all of that, let's get into the main content of the show.
All right, we're going.
So if you came around for history, this is the part of the show that you're going to want to stick around for. So in this episode, I wanted to talk about the wrestling schedule of Ed Strangler Lewis in 1913. And initially, I thought that I was going to cover the whole year, but I'm already up to 20 matches. And if you go back to the Evan Strangler Lewis episode, he wrestled 9 matches in all of 1886.
Yeah.
And part of it is travel. The other part of it is now, instead of just going to the big markets, some of the smaller markets are starting to develop.
Well, and that's what got me, Ken, is, Evan Strangler Lewis is up there. He's in Chicago. He's wrestling, like you said, in big markets. Kentucky. I mean, we're talking 1913 Kentucky. I don't even know if they've got running water down there yet, or indoor plumbing.
You've got electricity now. Louisville's a big town.
Well, yeah.
But most of the matches they actually had were in Lexington.
Yeah.
And I actually have the population figures before we get into his schedule.
Oh, okay.
So in 1913, in Louisville, it was a population of 223,928.
You know what? That surprises me. I didn't think it would be that much.
Lexington's population was 35,099.
Okay, yeah.
And then Paris, Kentucky, where they had the one spot show that we'll talk about, that was 5,859 people.
This was in what, 1913?
1913.
And just think of the hometown where my folks were from. It's still only 4,800
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things is, Lewis was based out of Kentucky for this year. And he primarily wrestled out of Lexington because that's where he was living. And he was the coach for, I think, the college. Wrestling and boxing coach for the college. I think there's a college in Lexington. It was either Lexington's college or a high school, but he was the wrestling and boxing coach.
So kind of like George Animal Steel would disappear every year between September and May.
Because he was teaching school in Detroit.
And he was one of the coaches. He was like a football coach up there, I believe.
Yep. So Lewis begins the year wrestling on January 24th, 1913, about 4 weeks into the year. And his first match is in Louisville, Kentucky against Bob Fredericks. And that's what I referenced at the beginning of the show.
Yeah.
I will know for certain in another couple of months when I'm done with the research and have the book written. But I think the reason he might have changed his name to Ed Strangler Lewis, which would be the name he would be known as for the rest of his career, was just because you weren't going to have Robert Friedrich wrestling in the same area as Bob Fredericks, because the fans would have had trouble keeping them straight.
Yeah, I would have had trouble keeping them straight.
Yeah.
But he changed his name. That's
right. And back then, you only got the newspapers to go by.
Right, exactly.
You didn't have TV or anything else. So. And then Lewis wins this match, 2 out of 3 falls. It's a work match where they're trading falls back and forth.
Right.
I only think there might be one contest, and I don't think it was an actual contest at first. I believe Lewis was working all of these matches in 1913, except the one that I'll point out, which I think devolved into a bit of a shoot, only because one of the guys either didn't want to go along with the finish or started going into business for himself, and Lewis shut him down.
Oh, okay.
So a week later, on January 31st, 1913, Lewis wrestles another shooter, William Demetral, in Louisville.
Mhm.
They're working though.
Yeah.
And in a work match, Demetral wins when Lewis strikes his head on the floor and is unable to continue. This was one of the ways that the wrestlers, if they wanted to add a little drama to it or make it save face for one of the wrestlers to build up future matches, odd things would happen, like they'd strike their head on the floor. Frank Gotch was the first one to do it.
Yeah.
In his work return matches with Fred Beal. He supposedly hit his head on a ring post, knocked him silly.
Yeah.
Beal beats him, and then 3 weeks later, he beats Beal for the American title.
Okay.
They're both matches were worked.
Right, yeah.
So that was kind of a common tactic. On February 6th, he is now in Lexington, and Demetral was supposed to wrestle Bob Fredericks in Lexington, but Demetral couldn't get to town, so Lewis stepped in since he lived there.
Oh, what was the primary source of travel between Lexington and...
I'm thinking a train. It was 80 miles.
Yeah.
You could take, I guess it would have been a horse and buggy.
Yeah.
Because, you would have had cars in 1913, but I don't know you'd have roads.
They'd probably have about 13 miles an hour. So
yeah, my guess is there was because trains were all over the country.
Yeah.
And we had lots of passenger trains, and my guess is it was a train service it's 80 miles between Lexington and Louisville.
Okay.
And then it's less than 20 miles from Lexington to Paris.
Okay, so it was probably all trains. So
that's my guess is it's trains.
You got to be kind of slow not to catch a train. But anyway.
Yeah, but he was slow, or the train, something happened with the train.
Yeah, because trains are always late too.
Yeah. So Lewis stepped in, and the men wrestled to a draw, but Lewis was considered the loser because he had said he would throw Fredericks twice in an hour. I think the promoter was just trying to preserve the Demetral Fredericks match.
Right.
You're not going to let Lewis beat him.
No,
But they didn't necessarily want Fredericks to beat Lewis either, so. And then on February 19th, 1913, again, I'm going to quit saying 1913 since all these matches are 1913.
Right.
So on February 19th, Lewis wrestled Jack Stone in Lexington, and the men traded falls before Stone suffered an injury and had to forfeit the match to Lewis. Again, we're seeing this kind of common pattern here. You don't want a clean victory, so somebody strikes ahead,
disqualifies,
has to forfeit. Or on February 22nd, he goes back to Louisville, so he travels 80 miles up to Louisville, and he defeats Doc Domer of Chicago in 2 straight falls in less than 49 minutes. This, I also believe, was a work, but Doc Domer couldn't have beat Lewis no matter what. So now the next match on March 6th, which is back in Lexington, this is the match I think may have turned into a shoot from a work.
Okay.
There's a German wrestler named Harry Faust, and the only time I found him so far in Kentucky at all in 1913 is in this match.
Oh, okay.
So he comes and he wrestles Lewis, and Lewis, even at 21 years of age, was capable of handling himself and had some carnival catch training. Catch as catch can training.
Okay.
And maybe Faust just thought he was going to try Lewis because Lewis was only 21. But Lewis needed only 22 and 18 minutes to pin Faust in straight falls. And the reason I think it started to turn into a bit of a contest was Faust started using rough tactics on Lewis. He elbowed him in the face.
Oh.
He drug his arm across his nose, and I think he bloodied his nose.
Oh. Kind of
So
threw
then,
a couple of potatoes, huh?
Yeah, so then I think Lewis quit cooperating so much and just kind of beat him.
Yeah, okay.
So, but that was probably started out as a work and ended up as more of a contest. On March 12th, Lewis defeats Gus Chamoy, a Greek wrestler, in 2 straight falls. I think this is just somebody Jerry Walls was the promoter at the time. I think this is just somebody Walls brought in for him to beat.
Right.
So then on March 14th, Lewis wrestles to a draw with Young Olson, who, after looking at the newspaper articles, it's Charlie Olson, who was based out of St. Louis for quite a bit.
Okay.
He actually killed at least one wrestler.
Oh.
I think this one he claimed was purpose, and one was an accident for sure. He supposedly in Canada got mad at a wrestler and threw him out of the ring head first.
Oh.
And the guy died, and he didn't really care.
Yeah.
But he was wrestling under a different name in Texas against a guy from Colorado, who's also, they knew who each other was. The fans didn't. And he put a full Nelson on the guy and broke his neck accidentally.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And they said that one haunted him.
Yeah, I'm sure it did.
But yeah, he wrestled, and Olsen had a really developed reputation at that time. Lewis did not quite have that reputation yet. So a draw with Olsen, you could tell that Walls is trying to build Lewis up as a big.
And I was going to ask you, today they say that, there's a bunch of jobbers, if you will, enhancement talent. Was that really a thing back in that time, or was it more people were pretty much
not the way we think of it today? There wasn't, a bunch of local wrestlers who would just come in and do the job to a big. But yes, there were guys that you could get to come in from a different town if you wanted to put your guy over.
Yeah.
And you could also get guys like Charlie Olsen if you paid him good money.
Yeah.
To come in and help build up, like Lewis, because Wall not only brought in Olsen, but he also brought in Dr. Ben Roller.
Oh, okay.
And Dr. Ben Roller was a huge star in the 19 teens. He had wrestled Frank Gotch a couple times.
Yeah.
He trained George Hackenschmidt for the second Gotch Hackenschmidt
Oh,
match.
okay, yeah.
So he was a very well-known name. And Jerry Walls, who was the promoter in Lexington and Louisville, brought him in to try to build Lewis up as well.
Oh, okay.
So he definitely saw a lot in Lewis.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was like a big pool of, guys from Louisville that were...
There would not have been.
Okay.
And a lot of times you brought guys, so if you're in Louisville and Lexington, you might reach into Indiana or Ohio. You could even go as far as St. Louis and that to bring in guys who are just getting started or whatever.
Yeah.
Your guy beats them because they're not coming back. So they don't care if they're putting somebody over.
Gotcha.
Because they're not coming back. And in this era, we're definitely going more heavily towards work matches, but there were still contests occasionally.
Right, yeah.
And you'd have guys show up and say, no, I'm not putting your guy over. And it would turn into a contest.
Right, yeah.
That doesn't really happen today. People like to talk about shoots, but they're not really shoots. They're when people quit cooperating with you. Like we were talking about Nia Jax and Charlotte Flair.
Right, yeah.
Where they kind of got into a fisticuff in the middle of that. They weren't shooting. They weren't trying to change the outcome of the match. They just got mad at each other and started pounding on each other. So... on March 28th, Lewis wrestles Charlie Olsen again, and this time he wins two of the three falls in the 2 out of 3 fall match. This also occurs in Lexington. So this is Lewis's 9th match, which is how many Evan Lewis had in all of 1886. So at the end of March, he's already had as many matches. So you're now starting to see the differences that travel allows you, the fact that you can put on these matches in smaller venues and still draw enough of a crowd to justify holding them and stuff.
Right.
And when you start getting into the 20s and airplane travel and vehicle travel gets to be more and more prevalent, now they're going to start wrestling, not every day yet, not the 350 days we're going to talk about at the end of this month.
Right.
But you're talking, they're starting to have hundreds of matches a year instead of dozens. Or, as back in back in Evan Lewis's day, a dozen or less.
Well, now if you listen to Hulk Hogan, he wrestled 400 days one year.
Yeah. If you listen to Hulk Hogan, you're going to believe all kinds of crazy stuff. You're still bogus to me, buddy boy.
That's right.
And so, this was big news because Olsen, the newspaper claims, had not dropped 2 falls in 10 years.
Oh, okay.
I doubt that is the case.
Yeah.
There were all kinds of wild claims that you couldn't... There was no mass media then.
I was going to say,
you couldn't substantiate the claims. Yeah. So lots of crazy claims were made because they knew there was no way. Almost every foreign wrestler that ever came to the United States was a champion where they came from.
Yes,
but they probably weren't. They probably weren't the champion of Creekwater, Europe. But, that's... You just couldn't verify those kinds of things back then. But he was a huge star, and he had beat a lot of named people. He had matches with Gotch and all of them, so people knew who Charlie Olson was.
Yeah.
On April 8th, Lewis would wrestle Eddie Schultz in Lexington. Lewis won the last 2 falls of this 2 out of 3 falls match, and he used a stranglehold like Evan Strangler Lewis used to, and that's the guillotine choke or the front face lock.
Oh, okay.
And that hold would actually be banned in the late teens. That's why Lewis started using the headlock. These are all worked matches.
Yeah.
But Lewis, there's no doubt Lewis knew how to put it on for real if he wanted to.
I was going to say...
As a matter of fact, I'll put a picture with the show notes for this episode that you can go to KenZimmermanJr.com, episode 34, and I'll put the picture of Lewis with this guillotine choke on Ivan Linow.
Okay.
It's from the mid-teens before they banned the hold.
Now, were they... did anybody ever give a reason as why that hold was banned?
They thought it was too dangerous. I mean, they don't let you use a rear naked choke in police work anymore.
Right.
Because too many police officers who either lacked training or didn't know how to apply it properly.
Or overzealous.
Yep. Are way too overzealous.
Mm-hmm.
Held that on carotid artery choke is the safest thing you can use, unless the only time it's dangerous when you're applying it is if someone is older, and I'm talking over 65 or whatever.
Yeah.
You could actually cause the arteries here on the side of your neck to collapse.
Oh,
if you're squeezing those and they're that old. But on the type of people you're going to actually have to use that on, it's going to be somebody strong and probably young.
Mm-hmm.
It's the safest thing. It's the only thing I'd ever put on Trey, because you had to break Trey's arm. Trey will not trap to an arm lock.
Right, yeah.
So I never even bothered trying to put one on him. But there's no tough guy with a choke.
Yeah.
You tap or you go to sleep. And if
Right.
they let it go, within 10, 15 seconds, you're back to normal.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you slap them on the back of the neck.
But you don't even have to do that most of the time. Most of the time when you let go, the blood starts flowing again, and they just...
It was just a good show.
Yeah. Normally you don't even have to do that. But
yeah.
Because people held them on too long and were killing people, because that's the only thing you can do wrong.
Yeah.
You can either put pressure on the windpipe and crush the windpipe, but that was not what was killing people. What was killing people is you're holding them on. The guy is turning blue.
Yeah.
And if you deprive the brain of oxygen for too long, you kill the person.
Well, yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
why people were dying. Is because these guys were holding unconscious people for minutes.
Well, that's why people die of strokes.
Yeah,
it's because it lodges, the brain's deprived of oxygen and blood.
But they've always had this thing of being dangerous. Well, yeah, they're dangerous if you leave them, if you hold them on. Mm-hmm. But if you don't hold them on, it's the safest thing you can do to somebody. That's the only thing that will work on somebody who's high on PCP.
Yeah.
Nothing else will work on that.
Well, I'm just wondering because, I mean, I've seen Ed Strangler Lewis have this hold applied, and the stuff they're doing now in wrestling is a lot more dangerous than that.
Much more. Yeah. But I can't remember if it was New York. One of the athletic commissions banned it, and then everybody else followed behind it. And part of it was because they got the maneuver over. Nobody was really applying it, but they made it look so dangerous. Mm-hmm. Now, when Evan Lewis did it, it was dangerous.
Yeah.
Sorikichi Matsuda. But when he was just selling how well, because everybody be like holding their throat after they got up and everything. They sold it so well, they really believed it was more dangerous than it was. So, I just did the Eddie Schultz from April 8th. Yeah. So on April 17th, he rematches with Eddie Schultz in Lexington. The stranglehold this time is barred, but Lewis still won the match by taking 2 out of 3 falls.
Oh, okay.
They're working.
Yeah.
On April 18th, Lewis rematched with William Demetriel in Louisville. Lewis won this match in 2 straight falls, which was very unusual.
Yeah.
Because they usually didn't do work matches in 2 straight falls. But you'll see later that Demetriel's going to get it back.
Oh, okay.
And Lewis used the stranglehold to take the first fall. And this was controversial in the Kentucky newspapers because they were talking about Lewis was a good enough wrestler and a strong enough wrestler that he did not have to use the stranglehold, which they kind of looked at as a dirty hold, mainly because of how Evan Lewis had used it.
Yeah. Well, and Evan Lewis and Ed Strangler Lewis, both of them were fairly stout gentlemen. So
yeah, and Evan Lewis was just junkyard dog mean?
Yeah.
So on April 28th, Charlie Olson comes back to Kentucky for the third time, and he and Lewis wrestle for a third time.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis won this match in 2 straight falls. So pretty much, Charlie Olson ain't going to come back.
Yeah.
So they make Lewis look really, really strong before he heads out. Now on May 5th, Lewis wrestles Frederick again. Bob Fredericks in Lexington.
Uh-huh.
Each man score a fall before resorting to rough tactics in the third fall. After a warning from the local police to knock it off, the Lexington police actually stopped this match. So it was a draw.
Oh wow! So yeah,
And I don't think they were smart. I think they thought things were getting too rough and stopped it. I don't think they were in cahoots with the promoter.
Yeah,
And that happened more than people realize back. So when Joe Stecker, I think we've covered the double cross before.
yeah,
But when Zbyszko double crossed Wayne Munn in Philadelphia and took the title legitimately,
yeah.
they had, and the match occurred on the same night. The match between Stecker and Zbyszko, who was the recognized world champion in a couple of states, took place in St. Louis at Sluice Field.
Oh, okay.
They drew 17,000 fans.
Oh, wow.
Lewis wrestled, and the reason it was St. Louis because Tom Pax
Yeah.
was in league with Stecker,
Ah, gotcha.
the St. Louis promoter. So, in I think Detroit, Lewis wrestled Munn because Munn was still recognized as the champion in 2 states, I think Illinois and somewhere else, because Billy Sandow pulled strings and made sure Zbyszko wasn't recognized everywhere.
So Illinois has always been a dirty state. That's what you're telling me.
I will say that the Illinois Commission was definitely, and it's funny, it was so close to St. Louis,
Uh-huh.
but Michigan and Illinois, I think, still recognized Munn, and I think New York and somebody else recognized Zbyszko's title, which Pax was in league with Stecker.
Yeah.
So I guess Stecker had, or Pax had plenty of pull with the Missouri Commission, but I guess none with Illinois.
No, in Illinois, yeah.
So yeah, so Sandow pulled strings, and that match drew 15,000.
Oh, wow. That's
But
respectable back in
Yes.
1913. Geez.
Well, no, this wasn't 13. This was the double cross.
Oh,
so that would have been
yeah.
25.
1925. But still, in 1925,
Yes.
that's still
But
a heck
then
of a
the
crowd.
business was dead for years.
Yeah.
That double cross, even though those matches drew well,
Uh-huh.
it killed wrestling for a long time. They didn't get back into the over 10,000 crowds again, I don't think, until the early 30s.
Oh, okay.
But what I was saying was Stecker wrestled Zbyszko here,
Uh-huh.
and that match ended on an injury to Zbyszko
Oh, okay.
and a separated shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
And the police arrested Stecker for purposefully injuring Zbyszko. And the
So basically assault and battery.
Yes. And the only reason they let him go was Zbyszko said, no, I was injured accidentally.
Yeah.
It wasn't Stecker's fault.
Jeez.
So they weren't smart into the fact that these guys were working it. So I don't
Somebody
think
needed to let the SLPD know that.
yeah. So I don't think the Lexington PD was smart either. So.
Yeah.
So now we're getting into May. On May 9th, Lewis rematched with William Demetral in Louisville. This time, Demetral won in 2 straight falls. He got his back
Got his back, yeah.
because Lewis was sick with indigestion. I'm just telling you what they reported to the
Okay, yeah. If we would have been on TV,
If
you would have seen my face.
If you could see Dan's face right now, there's a strong look of disbelief. So on May 14th now, it's when they bring in Dr. Roller.
Uh-huh.
And Lewis actually loses to Dr. Roller in 2 straight falls.
Okay.
He submits to the toe hold at 48 minutes of the first fall
Uh-huh.
and appears to be legitimately injured.
Oh.
Now, maybe not. You
Right. It's a work.
know. Yeah, they know how to work you.
Yeah.
But it looks like he's legitimately injured, but he does come back out for the second fall, which he loses in like a minute.
Uh-huh.
On May 21st, a week later, he wrestles a rematch with Bob Fredericks in Lexington. He still appears to be injured.
Uh-huh.
He took the first fall, but Fredericks took the last two. And after the first fall, which Lewis won with the stranglehold, and this is a work match.
Yeah.
He throws up several times in the ring and is still favoring the leg. So he might truly have been injured.
Right.
We don't know. I don't know if he could throw up on command. I don't know.
Well, Draws could, but
I don't think that's a well distributed skill.
Yeah.
Now on June 6th, and 4 times is quite a lot, even if he's causing himself.
Oh yeah.
On June 6th, Lewis wrestled a rematch with Jack Stone in Lexington. After 3 hours of exciting wrestling, the men agreed to a draw.
Oh.
I think that was still a work.
Why
would you wrestle for 3 hours and go for a work? Just wrestle for 2.
Right.
Because the matches were longer back then. 2 was more. I don't know if I ever told you, but my grandpa used to go to the wrestling matches with his Uncle Jules in the 1930s all the time. Late 20s, early 30s.
Yeah.
And he said you would go down to the Coliseum and they would get a hold on each other and they'd be on the mat.
Uh-huh.
And his uncle would say, okay, let's go. They'd run across the street, grab a couple sandwiches, because Uncle Jules would be coming right from work.
Yeah.
Pick up Grandpa, and they'd take the streetcar down to the Coliseum, which was downtown. They'd run across the street to get the food. They would come back, and Grandpa said they'd be gone 10 minutes. The guys were still in the same place on the ring. The match tended to go much longer.
Yeah.
And they were trying to make it look like actual wrestling matches, too.
Yeah.
But a 3-hour draw seems a little excessive. And there was so much going on, I really do think they were working.
In this day and age, that wouldn't work.
No, nobody's going to...
We don't have the attention span.
Yeah. One of the future episodes, we're going to talk about a 5-hour match, which was a contest. That was one of the reasons they started working much more, because legitimate contests could sometimes be very long and very indecisive with very little action.
Well, that's like some of the old bare-knuckle boxing. They would go 80 rounds, 100 rounds.
Yeah, because if the person got knocked down or thrown, a lot of those bare-knuckle fighters were really good wrestlers.
Yeah.
You get thrown, that ends the round.
Yeah.
And you had to toe to scratch, meaning when the rest period was over, you had to be back on the spot ready to fight.
Yes.
And that's a lot of times how some guys couldn't come back to the scratch. That's how the fight would end.
Right.
So on June 17th, so he wrestled on June 6th with Jack Stone. On June 17th, so almost a month after he wrestles Dr. Roller, he wrestles him again. This time Lewis wins the first fall with a stranglehold. Roller wins the next 2 falls, and Roller tells the Lexington newspaper that kid's a future world champion, which he was right about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But you could tell Roller is trying to build him up. That's what he came in for. So, what do you think we had to end the month? Lewis versus Bob Fredericks. We got to bring Fredericks back.
Now, is this in Paris or?
Yep, this is the match in Paris. So on June 26th, Walls had run a show with Dimitro versus Fredericks a month before that, and the show drew very well. So they brought him back, but this time it was Lewis versus Fredericks.
Right.
Lewis won in straight falls with a stranglehold, and then a referee's DQ of Fredericks in the second fall. Fredericks started doing the rough stuff.
Yeah.
So the referee disqualified him. So all of that, when we go through that, Lewis wrestled 20 matches in the first half of 1913.
Right.
13 of those were in Lexington, where he and promoter Jerry Walls lived. 6 were in Louisville, which was and is the biggest city in Kentucky.
Right.
It's still the biggest city in Kentucky to this day. And wrestled the one time in Paris. And we've already talked about the distances between the towns.
Right.
So you're already seeing, when you compare that with the Evans Strangler Lewis schedule, you're already starting to see that the advancements in transportation and the building of professional wrestling as a spectator sport is allowing the wrestlers to wrestle a lot more and to make more money doing so, because you're going to make more money wrestling 20 matches than you are 9.
Well, yeah.
That also helped increase the transition of the professional wrestling from more work to exhibit, or more sport to exhibition, because you had much fewer contests and much more exhibitions.
Right.
Exhibitions.
I was just wondering, driving a car from Pittsburgh to Philadelphia and into Boston and New York, like the guys up in the WWE. Could you imagine riding a train every other week, 80 miles back and forth to...
Yeah, you couldn't do the 350 days with the travel that they had back then, which is impossible. And think, the interstate highway system didn't come into being until the 1950s.
Yeah.
And it still took 30, 40 years for all those roads to really be built out. I know in the 80s, they said in Mid-South, a lot of the roads in Louisiana and Mississippi were still two-lane highway, one lane going one way and not divided. So, head-on collisions are always something you're trying to avoid and everything. So it would not have been easy to get around then. Think of how much harder it is to get around in 1913.
Yeah, exactly.
And how much harder even still it is to get around in 1886. You're going to big cities because you could get there.
Right.
If the trains don't run there,
you don't.
And there's really no other reliable, you're not going.
Right.
So
that's why I was surprised that in 1913 he could be based out of someplace like Lexington, Louisville.
Right. But it has to be train service between Lexington and Louisville. I can't see anybody riding a horse-drawn carriage 80 miles all the time,
right?
Back and forth.
Or some Model A or something like that.
What roads in 1913? How many roads were built to take automobile traffic?
No, you pretty much followed a horse trail or something like that.
Exactly. So, and hope it don't rain.
Right.
So we do have a review this week, but it's a really short one.
Yeah.
The next episode, we're actually going to review two matches. We're going to review a match with the person we're looking at today, Angelo Poffo, the father of Randy Savage and Lanny Poffo. We're going to look at his match versus Wilbur Snyder. Wilbur Snyder was a much bigger star than who he wrestled this week. And we're also going to look at the Randy Macho Man Savage versus Bret the Hitman Hart. So Dan's favorite wrestler from the 80s, or favorite wrestler after he emerged, Harley was his first. And then my favorite wrestler from the 90s, Bret the Hitman Hart, in a match on Saturday night's main event from November of 1987. It's available on Peacock. And we're going to review those two matches. But we just did a short one because we knew that with all the news and everything that was probably going to be a pretty long intro.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So the one we looked at was Angelo Poffo versus Jerry Christie from the 1950s in Chicago. And this was a young Angelo Poffo. Jerry Christie was from a wrestling family. He's one of the lesser known of the family, but
I still say he's the illegitimate father of Bob Backlund.
He did look a lot like Bob Backlund. And it's only 6 minutes, and about 2 minutes of that is Angelo Poffo putting his jacket away.
I was waiting for him to take his bobby pins out.
Yeah. But I will say that there is a part of this match that's obviously missing, because it goes from Angelo Poffo going to tie up with Jerry Christie to being in the middle of Christie's comeback from something. So they obviously cut some of it away. But this is from the 1950s. We have a lot of the 1950s matches from Chicago. Fred Kohler was the Chicago promoter, and he got national television when the network TVs really used a lot of wrestling to build up their fan base initially.
Yeah.
So you had wrestling out of Hollywood, but that was not an NWA territory.
Right.
And then the wrestling out of Chicago. And that was so controversial because of the territory system that I believe Kohler had to pay some money to the other NWA members so that they would be okay with him having a national television show.
Right.
But this match was from the 50s in Chicago, and it was Angelo Poffo versus Jerry Christie. What did you think about that?
I thought that Angelo Poffo came out and did some traditional wrestling moves, and then he started grappling. And when he finished his match, he used a neck breaker, which was which is a pretty standard move nowadays. That's
not going to be a finisher in very many matches.
No, but I could see and like we discussed before, I saw neither Lanny or Randy taking after their father's style of wrestling.
Yeah, that's the first thing that struck me is I didn't really see a whole lot of Angelo and Lanny or Randy or vice versa. Mm-hmm. It didn't look like they picked that much up from. I'm sure they picked up a lot of knowledge about the business.
Oh, yes.
But the wrestling styles, they all three had very distinct, unique wrestling styles. Mm-hmm. I have to admit, I never really took the Lanny Poffo style of wrestling. I didn't find it very exciting. It's
acrobatics. And we've been over through this before. Oh, sometimes his move made no sense, Ken.
Right. And that's I think that's why I never really... Because Randy was a high flyer at times, but his stuff made sense.
Well, his finisher was an elbow off the top rope. That made sense,
But some of the stuff, why is Lanny doing a cartwheel in the middle of the...
Exactly. Is it just to showboat? Is it to taunt? It doesn't make no sense.
He's supposed to be the good guy, and he's doing a cartwheel around, and it's just...
Yeah.
I never did take to Lanny's... Now, today, his stuff would probably look a lot better in comparison to some of the other things.
Oh, God, yes.
But I just never... But I loved Randy Savage, not as much as you.
Wish somebody would have taken Lanny's poems and stuck them right up his laureate.
Yeah. Those were some of the worst poems. I mean, I will say nothing was worse in 80s WWF than those horrible skits. Fuji Vice, Fuji this, Don Morocco,
and Fuji, yes.
There was nothing worse than that. Those were the worst things I ever saw.
Oh my gosh! Yeah,
but
that was bad.
Some of Lanny's poems were right up there with that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the worst thing I think I ever saw on a wrestling program was Fuji Vice, and it's like it went on forever too. It's like, this is terrible, and it just keeps going.
And the thing is, Fuji was a big prankster.
Yeah.
So he was probably like, let's do this and draw it out and just...
Until Vince forces us to stop.
Right. I don't even think Bobby Heenan liked it.
No, he would put it over like, oh, this was great stuff, but you could tell, oh my goodness, I'm never going to get that time of my life back.
And Monsoon. And maybe, this could be a topic sometime down the road, but, I always thought Gorilla Monsoon was perhaps one of the most underrated big wrestlers in his time.
Yes, and I still think that he is also underrated as an announcer. People make fun of this, hanging off the rafters and some of the same comments. He's also the one that gave Bret Hart his nickname, the Excellence of Execution.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He and Bobby together were what made them so great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, Bobby was hilarious. But you needed Gorilla there playing the straight man and everything. And it used to crack me up how Bobby would break Gorilla up when Gorilla was supposed to be disgusted with him. Gorilla would start laughing, but then Gorilla got Bobby.
Oh yeah, he did. But Gorilla Monsoon, when he was wrestling, he was a big man.
Oh, he was the most credible opponent for Bruno Sammartino in his first run in the 60s. Mm-hmm.
And what got me is, I believe it was WrestleMania 2, where they had the Battle Royal with some of the NFL guys.
Yep, that was WrestleMania 2.
Bruno Sammartino was in that Battle Royal.
Yep. In his 50s.
And you know what? Still looked like a brick, what?
Yeah. Not somebody you'd want to mess with.
No.
Dick the Bruiser, we were talking about earlier, in his 50s, he still looked like somebody you didn't want to mess with.
Yeah.
But he did not have the muscle that he had when he was young.
Mm-hmm.
Bruno was pretty stout still.
Yeah.
And even when he was in his 70s, he had cut down from the 270s to about 215, 220. Mm-hmm. He still looked great.
Oh, I know he did.
And the man never took a steroid in his life. And
no.
bench pressed 565 pounds. Crazy.
Man, that is crazy. Yeah, that is crazy.
Speaking of crazy, I think that people, if anybody's still around, they're like, are these guys going to end the show?
Right. Yeah, this was we got long-winded on this one.
Yeah, as I've always said, historians tend to wax philosophical, and
yes,
we kind of went far afield in this episode.
And
but I think we've insulted about as many people as we could possibly insult this week.
Well, and both of us are history buffs.
Yeah.
Different eras, but still history buffs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but you say we insulted just about everybody we could, but did they deserve it?
Well, I would say probably most of them deserved it.
All right.
We might have got a couple of people that didn't deserve it, but I think most of the people that we insulted deserved it.
Okay.
And I did say a couple nice things about Tony Khan.
Yeah, I don't know if I don't want to lose my lunch or my breakfast from doing that.
Well, I thought it was apropos. I thought we were a little hard on him. He's trying.
Well,
sometimes he's very trying.
Like you said though, he's running that show from a fan's point of view.
Yeah, he's not running it like a wrestling booker or a executive. He's running it like a fan that gets to hang out with the people he's always admired.
Yeah, it'd be like me and you getting to manage our favorite NFL teams.
Yeah, they would be in big trouble.
Yeah, they would.
So I think that's it for this episode of It Was Almost Real. I don't know what else we could beat to death this week. Next episode, we'll look at Jack Pfeffer exposing the work nature of professional wrestling in 1933. A lot of people think that if it comes out that it's worked, that it kills the business, but that's not generally been the case. It might hurt it a little bit.
Yeah.
But it normally doesn't sink the business as much as people thought. So if you want to check out the show notes, as I said before, kenzimmerjr.com/episode 34. You can also see what I'm currently working on if you go to kenzimmerjr.com. And thank you for listening today. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.